Okay, I have a update to Wolf. This is now version 1.2. There have been some changes. A couple of things are missing. You used to be able to, in version 1.1, use a push button on the front page to determine whether or not the right stomp switch went to the loop feedback or the delay feedback. That has been eliminated, mostly because I only use the delay feedback, which is what it goes to now. If you want to set the loop feedback to maximum, you can still do that from the front page. The 2 pixels on the bottom that showed the status of the delay lines are also missing. That was just a preventative CPU measure, because I don't want clipping and they seemed extraneous. You can still monitor the delay lines and their time divisions on the second page. The modulation has been slightly reworked. You probably won't notice it. And some things have been shifted around on the front page for aesthetic reasons and functional reasons. The biggest one is that glide has moved down here, and the modulation on-off button has been pushed over. That's to make room for a resonance control. Pardon me. A resonance control. The resonance is applied to the filters. I guess that's pretty obvious. The filters, and at 0, it's at what the default of the original patch was. And as you turn it up to 1, it doesn't become like super resonant, because the filters are in the feedback path of the delay line, and it just turns to really unpleasant sounds too quickly if they go too high, because they introduce gain. But you may hear that the frequencies at the cutoff point are accentuated, and I think it creates just a little bit more of a rhythmic quality. As the delay feedback is increased, it can get into oscillation territory, or if you max this, so yeah, that's pretty unpleasant. At that particular frequency, the filters open pretty wide now. You know, depending on where the cutoff frequency of the filter is, that will have a different effect. But it was pretty high, so it was picking up on the high-pitched sounds of the pitched up repeats, which is maybe not an ideal application of the resonance control. I'm going to drop that back down to 0, but it's an option that's there. In certain conditions, you may hear that control click, because it's a multi-filter, and with the CPU being where it is, it can cause momentary clipping as the control is adjusted, but that's only while the control is being adjusted. It will stop as soon as you set it at a new resonance. So the biggest addition in version 1.2, and there are actually 2 version 1.2s, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, is this line down at the bottom. Here we have something called length, and what that does is it adjusts the endpoint of the loop that's recorded that forms the foundation of the delay in Wolf. And then you have the option to apply that edit to any or none of the steps. Just like you can apply reverse to any or none of the steps. And just like any of the steps has an individual pitch control. So right now I have it set up because I have the step pressed here to go back and forth between step 1 and 2. Step 1 is unpitched and step 2 is pitched an octave up, which means that it will repeat twice because it's sped up. In order to achieve the octave effect, it plays twice as fast. So right, so every beat that occurs with the octave up will function twice as fast. The length edit is set to 0.5, which means that when the loop reaches its halfway point, it'll go back and begin again. The endpoint has been moved to the middle of the loop. So if we have the unpitched loop set to have the length edit applied, we'll get something like this. And they'll actually record, their loops will last the same amount of time, even though they won't contain as much information because it's compressed more in the sped up loop. But if I apply this to the double time loop, it will actually cut that loop length in half. So you'll hear 4 repeats instead of 2. And you know, you can create some interesting rhythmic effects with that. And you can set it to other lengths too. You know, as you increase this, things become glitchier, you know. Keep pushing it higher. So when it's at 0, there's no effect. And things below 0.5 will create sort of loops that don't quite complete and start over, and then they move on to the next step. So there's a lot of, I think, really cool sort of glitchy textures and rhythmic textures that you can get out of this control. So this is the PS version, which means pre-speed. And what that means is essentially that the length of the loop is considered before any speed is applied. So if it's cut in half when it's at regular speed, it'll still be cut in half when it's sped up twice, which means you'll hear 4 half loops play during a step, right? Which is why we get, those 4 repeats when it's sped up. There is another version that I'm going to include in this called FXD, which stands for fixed. And that's, these are options in the looper module. And that means that the speed is fixed in this patch. I'm going to use the same examples here. And let me turn down the glide, although I'll come back to that because glide does something really interesting in the fixed form. So we have the same, no, I'm going to set the length to 0.5 again. So when it was 0.5 in the other one, at normal speed, the loop would be chopped up twice, and the doubled loop would be chopped up 4 times. Here, something different happens. So what's happening here is that the length is being treated as an absolute. The length of the loop buffer is being treated as an absolute. And so the length only applies to, this is kind of hard to explain, and I'm going to fail here. So just letting you know. Basically, it means that length will only be applied if the length edit makes the loop shorter than it otherwise would be. So right now, this is causing this loop that's playing at normal speed to be chopped up twice and played twice, because the length is supposed to be twice of what the total buffer is. But when it's sped up an octave, it already plays twice, so there's no effect on the length edit. And the advantage of this approach is that within reason, it starts doing some of the same things you would expect. Otherwise, when you really push up the pitch, but within, certain bounds, that means you can create a sequence of loops that change pitches and repeat the same number of times within each step, which has some really cool rhythmic effects. I'm gonna show off some of those. We have our unpitched loop. We have one that goes up an octave, one that goes a fifth, and one that goes down an octave, and they'll all repeat the same number of times per step. I hope you hear what I'm trying to explain when I start playing. So because none of the sped up loops have buffers that are shorter than 2 repeats, they don't play more than you can hear some skipping with the fifth up, because its buffer is not quite 1 or 2 repeats, so it plays like 2.5 times, or maybe it's 3 times during that length edit. But the step that's pitched down an octave only plays twice. It just cuts the loop into a quarter, because it's slowed down in order to achieve that change in pitch. The fixed version, so with the pre-speed version, you can get all sorts of weird rhythmic variations, because the speed is, or the length edit is determined by the length of the loop after it's sped up. So stuff that's sped up will be cut up even more by the same length edit. Here, what happens is that it tries to maintain the same length regardless of the speed, and when you apply glide to that, you get a really, I think, interesting effect. So all of the repeats, all of the cut up loops in any given step as it's gliding between different pitches are also the same amount. So you get this weird sort of like revving up motor sort of thing going on that I think is just really cool. But between the two versions, you get a lot of different ways to do interesting, glitchy, rhythmic stuff with, you know, again, all of the same features pretty much that you had in versions 1 and 1.1, except the things that I explained at the beginning. And I didn't do a video for 1.1, but the biggest addition there, I can show it off here, is that you can restart the loop or the sequence by pressing this button, which was suggested by one of the on YouTube by someone watching the video. But the advantage there is that, you know, they suggested it would be a way to sync up the sequence to parts of songs, but you can also do, I think, some interesting creative stuff. With that. So it's both functional and, I think, performative, potentially performative. But otherwise, you know, all of the same controls are there. If you want to ignore this length edit thing, just turn it off on all the steps. You never have to think about it again. If you want to ignore the resonance thing, just set it to 0 and you never have to think about it again. A couple of controls, like I said, have moved around because of that, but you know, other than that, it's the exact same patch with just some added features. I did modify, like I said, the mod section, but I think I did it in a way that you probably won't really notice the difference. So yeah, that's Wolf 1.2. Like I said, there are two versions, one with fixed speed loopers and one with pre-speed loopers. And they do different things with this length edit control. So I hope you enjoy it and have fun. And I'm gonna put on some weird robot sounds.